The signal screamed across every frequency humanity had ever monitored. It wasn't the polite hail of traders or the measured tones of diplomats. This was raw panic, transmitted in 73 different languages simultaneously, begging anyone who could hear to help. Ambassador Rella had sent it herself, her wing claws trembling as she activated the emergency beacon. Her people, the avians of Nest 7, had never known war. For 800 generations they had lived in peace, building cities that floated on thermal currents and singing songs that lasted for days. Now their world burned beneath the assault of the Ravager horde, and Rella watched her people die from the council chamber high above the capital. "Please," she whispered into the transmitter, knowing her words would take weeks to reach anyone. "We cannot fight. We have never fought. Someone must help us." Halfway across the galaxy, Dr. Nina Okonkwo was reviewing xenobiology reports when the transmission cut through her audio feed. She sat up straight in her small office aboard the research station, her heart pounding as she listened to the desperate plea. The scans attached to the message showed ships, massive things covered in organic armor, tearing through orbital platforms like paper. "Oh no," Nina breathed, immediately forwarding the message to Earth Command. Not them. Not the peaceful ones. The Galactic Council had convened within hours, filling the vast chamber with representatives from 47 different species. High Counselor Bryn, a towering reptilian whose scales shimmered green and gold, addressed the assembly with grave concern. "We have all received the distress call from Nest 7, Bryn said, his voice carrying across the chamber without electronic aid. "The Ravager horde has begun what appears to be a systematic extermination campaign. We must discuss our response." The chamber erupted in nervous chittering and whistles. A delegate from the herbivorous grass-eaters stood, her forelegs trembling. "What can we do? Our species have evolved past violence. We have no weapons, no warriors." "Precisely the problem," muttered a representative from the Crystal Singers, beings of living mineral who communicated through resonance. "We are a council of the peaceful." "The Ravagers know this." Bryn's tail swished in agitation. "There is one species among us who might intervene. The humans have military capabilities." A hush fell over the assembly. Eyes, sensors, and stalks all turned toward the human delegation. Captain David Lee stood slowly, his uniform crisp and his expression calm despite the weight of hundreds of alien gazes upon him. "Earth is prepared to respond," David said simply. "No." The shout came from a floating gas bag creature near the back. "Do you know what you're suggesting? Humans are from a death world. They are predators. If we unleash them, how do we know they will stop with the Ravagers?" David felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice level. "Because we gave you our word when we joined this council. We would protect, not conquer." Bryn raised one clawed hand for silence. "The humans have been peaceful members for 5 years now. But I must ask, Captain Lee, do you understand what you're volunteering for? The Ravagers are ruthless. They have wiped out 17 colonies in the past year." "Then it's time someone stopped them," David replied. The council debated for 3 more hours. Species after species expressed fear not just of the Ravagers but of humanity itself. They spoke in hushed tones about Earth's history, the wars and weapons, the fact that humans had nearly destroyed themselves before reaching the stars. They worried that sending human warships would be replacing one nightmare with another. Finally, Bryn called for a vote. The motion barely passed. Humanity was authorized to respond to the distress call, but with strict monitoring by council observers. David returned to his ship, the Armstrong, and immediately began assembling a volunteer fleet. Word had spread through human space faster than official channels. Within a day, 47 ships had gathered, ranging from converted cargo haulers with bolted-on railguns to proper military frigates from Earth's Defense Force. Nina arrived on the Armstrong's hangar deck, carrying 3 cases of equipment. David met her personally, raising an eyebrow at her presence. "I'm coming with you," she said before he could speak. "I'm the only xenobiologist who has studied Ravager physiology. You'll need me." "This isn't a research mission, Doctor. I know exactly what it is," Nina said quietly. "Those people are dying because they don't know how to fight. We do. That's not something to be proud of, Captain, but it is something we can use to save lives." David studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Welcome aboard. Brief my tactical team in 1 hour." As the fleet prepared to depart, Lieutenant Amy Rhodes reviewed the tactical data on the Ravagers. The insectoid species operated on a hive mind principle, with individual units showing little creativity, but terrifying coordination. They had evolved on a world where resources were scarce and competition was lethal. Violence was their first language. "They're going to outnumber us significantly," Amy said during the briefing. "Current estimates put their fleet at Nest 7 at over 100 ships. "Then we don't fight them head-on," David said. "We fight like humans." The other officers around the table looked at him questioningly. Sergeant Owen Blake, a grizzled Marine with scars from the Martian uprising, grinned slowly. "Dirty," Owen said. "Smart," David corrected. "Asymmetric, unpredictable, every advantage we can take." As the fleet jumped into faster-than-light travel, Nina stood in the observation deck watching the stars stretch into lines. She thought about the avians, their beautiful cities and peaceful culture, now under attack by creatures who saw them as nothing more than resources to consume. She thought about the other council species, afraid of both the Ravagers and the humans they had asked for help. She understood their fear. Humanity carried violence in its DNA, shaped by millions of years of predation and warfare on a world that tried to kill them daily. But that same violence, that same predatory instinct, could be turned toward protection. Humans knew how to hunt because they had been hunted. They knew how to fight because they had fought for survival every day of their evolution. The Ravagers were about to learn what happened when prey called upon predators for help. Somewhere in the depths of space, Ambassador Rella watched her world burn and prayed that anyone had heard her call. She didn't know that help was coming. She didn't know that the help she had summoned would terrify her almost as much as the enemy she faced. The human fleet raced toward Nest 7, carrying with it the hope of salvation in the shadow of Earth's violent past. In 6 days they would arrive. In 6 days the Ravagers would discover they had made a terrible mistake. They had threatened the one thing humans would go to war to protect: innocent lives. The nightmare began with silence. No distress calls, no scattered debris, just empty space where a thriving trading post should have been. Lieutenant Amy Rhodes stared at the scanner display, her stomach sinking as she realized what she was seeing. "Captain, Station Bell 9 isn't responding to any hails," she reported. "And I'm not picking up any transponders. Not even emergency beacons." David Lee crossed the bridge in 3 strides, looking over her shoulder at the readings. The station should have housed 300 beings from a dozen different species. It served as a waypoint between Nest 7 and the core worlds, a place where travelers could rest and refuel. "Take us in closer," David ordered, "but keep weapons hot." The Armstrong glided forward and the truth revealed itself in the view screen. Station Bell 9 still existed, technically. Its structure remained mostly intact, spinning slowly in the void. But every airlock had been blown open from the outside. Atmosphere had vented into space, freezing instantly into crystalline clouds that still drifted among the wreckage. "Life signs?" David asked, though he already knew the answer. "None," Amy replied quietly. "They're all gone." The rest of the fleet maintained formation around the Armstrong as teams suited up for recovery operations. Sergeant Owen Blake led his Marines through the station's torn hull, their helmet lights cutting through the frozen darkness. What they found would haunt them for years. The Ravagers hadn't just killed everyone aboard. They had been methodical about it, dividing victims by species and taking samples. Biocontainers lined one section of the cargo bay, filled with tissue and organs. A laboratory had been set up in the station's former cafeteria, where the Ravagers had apparently studied their victims' physiology. "They're learning," Owen reported over the comm, his voice tight with controlled rage. "Testing for weaknesses, figure out how each species dies most efficiently." Nina reviewed the data from the scene in her lab, her hands shaking as she cataloged the horror. The Ravagers were treating genocide like a science experiment, optimizing their approach for maximum efficiency. "How long ago?" David asked when she presented her findings. 36 hours, maybe 40, Nina said. "They're moving fast, hitting every population center they can find between here and Nest 7. A proximity alarm interrupted them. Ships approaching fast, civilian configurations but flying in a panic. Amy had them on screen in seconds. 12 vessels, none larger than a shuttle, engines running beyond safe limits. "They're avians," Amy said. "Refugees from the outer colonies." David opened a channel immediately. "This is Captain David Lee of the Earth vessel Armstrong. You're safe now." We're here to help. The response came in broken gasps, the translator struggling with the speaker's distress. Humans, you are the Deathworlders? The predator species? We're the ones who answered your distress call, David said carefully. You can dock with us. We have supplies, medical facilities. A long pause followed. Finally, a different voice spoke, older and steadier. We are grateful for your response, Captain. But forgive us if we are cautious. We have never encountered your kind before. The avians docked, but they refused to leave their ships for hours. Finally, hunger and exhaustion drove them to the Armstrongs' common area. Nina went to meet them, moving slowly and keeping her hands visible. Ambassador Rella's cousin, a smaller avian named Pip, spoke for the group. His feathers were matted with dried blood, one wing bent at an unnatural angle. They came without warning, he said. The sky turned dark with their ships. We thought perhaps they wanted to trade or had lost their way. Then they began firing. How many colonies have they hit? Nina asked gently. 7 that we know of. Everyone is dead or running. Pip's eyes, large and golden, fixed on Nina with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Your people are warriors, yes? You know how to fight? Yes, Nina admitted. Our people do not. We have no weapons. No soldiers. We sing and build and fly, but we do not know how to kill. Pip's voice broke. Can you teach us? Can you help us become like you? Nina felt tears prick her eyes. You don't want to become like us, but we can fight for you. Over the next 2 days, more refugee ships arrived. Each carried the same story of sudden attack, methodical slaughter, and desperate flight. The avians clustered together in the larger cargo bays, afraid to be alone, jumping at every sound. The human crew tried to help, but their very presence unsettled the refugees. When Sergeant Blake walked past a group of avian children, they scattered like birds before a cat. When a Marine laughed at a joke in the mess hall, the avians nearby froze in terror. They're more afraid of us than the Ravagers, Owen said to David privately. At least the Ravagers make sense to them. They're predators who kill, but we're predators who claim to protect. That's unnatural to them. David nodded slowly. The galaxy has been peaceful for so long they've forgotten that peace has a price. Someone has to be willing to do violence to defend it. Amy interrupted with an urgent report. Captain, we've detected a Ravager patrol. 4 ships, medium cruisers. They're heading straight for the refugee fleet. Every human on the bridge felt the shift in atmosphere. The time for rescue operations had ended. Now came the part humanity knew best. Sound battle stations, David ordered. All ships weapons free. Let's show them what a Deathworld species can do. The Armstrong and her sister ships moved to intercept. The Ravager vessels looked like something grown rather than built, all curves and chitinous armor plating. They outnumbered the human ships and they were larger, but they came on without hesitation or fear. They don't think we're a threat, Amy observed. That's their first mistake, David replied. The battle began at extreme range, the Ravagers opening fire with bioplasma weapons that splashed against the Armstrong's shields. The human ships spread out, breaking formation in ways that seemed random to the Ravagers' tactical computers. But there was nothing random about it. Each ship moved with purpose, creating overlapping fields of fire while presenting minimal target profiles. When the Ravagers tried to adjust, the human ships had already moved again. Owen's Marines prepared in the boarding tubes. Remember your training, he told them. These things have exoskeletons. Joints and sensory organs are your primary targets. They think like a hive, so disruption is key. The Armstrong's railgun spoke, sending tungsten rods through space at a fraction of light speed. The Ravager shields absorbed the first hits, but the second volley found gaps, punching through armor and venting atmosphere. One Ravager ship attempted to ram the Armstrong, a tactic that should have worked against any sane species. But David didn't flinch. At the last second, the Armstrong rolled, presenting its armored keel and firing thrusters to slide beneath the enemy vessel. The ship's ventral guns raked the Ravager's underbelly at point-blank range. In their cargo bay, the avian refugees watched on monitors, unable to look away. They saw violence and coordination beyond their comprehension. The humans moved like they were parts of a single organism, but with individual creativity that the Ravager hive mind couldn't predict. They are dancing, Pip whispered in awe and horror. Dancing with death. The battle lasted 17 minutes. 3 Ravager ships were destroyed outright. The 4th attempted to flee, but Amy's tactical team had anticipated the retreat vector. The damaged cruiser flew straight into a minefield the humans had deployed at the battle's start. As the wreckage tumbled through space, David allowed himself one moment of satisfaction before returning to duty. "Rescue any survivors," he ordered. "I want prisoners for interrogation." Nina objected immediately. "Captain, the Ravagers don't take prisoners. If we do, we're setting a precedent they won't follow." "Then we said it anyway," David said firmly. "We're not them, Doctor. We're better." The Marines recovered 3 Ravagers from the wreckage. The insectoid creatures clicked and hissed, their compound eyes showing something the humans recognized: fear. The fleet regrouped and continued toward Nest 7, now with proof that humanity could fight and win. But the real battle still lay ahead. This had been a patrol, nothing more. Somewhere ahead, the Ravager horde waited with hundreds of ships and millions of warriors. They didn't know fear yet. They didn't understand what it meant to face a species that had climbed to the top of the food chain, on a planet that fought them every step of the way. They were about to learn. Nest 7 burned beneath a sky filled with alien ships. Ambassador Rella pressed her wing hands against the reinforced glass of her shelter, watching orbital defense platforms explode one by one. Each flash meant hundreds of her people dead, vaporized or cast into the void. The Ravager blockade had been in place for 3 days now and no help had come. "Perhaps no one heard our message," her aide whispered. "Perhaps we die alone." Rella wanted to offer hope, but what could she say? The galaxy was full of peaceful species who had forgotten how to wage war. The few predator species that existed had been integrated into galactic society so long ago that they too had lost their edge. The Ravagers, evolving in isolation on a world of scarcity and violence, had emerged ready to conquer. Then the sensors detected something new. Ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, but not Ravager vessels. These were smaller, their profiles unfamiliar. "Who are they?" Rella asked. Her aide checked the transponder codes, her beak dropping open in shock. "Humans, Earthships. They actually came. Hive Commander." Scrix received the same sensor data with something approximating contempt. The entity that commanded the Ravager fleet was less an individual and more a complex node in the greater Hive consciousness. It processed tactical data with cold efficiency, calculating threat levels and resource allocation. 47 human vessels against 112 Ravager ships. The mathematics were simple. The humans would be destroyed or driven off within hours. Then the harvest of Nest 7 could continue uninterrupted. Scrix had never encountered humans before. The Hive's collective knowledge included basic information about Earth and its inhabitants, but nothing suggesting they posed a significant military threat. They were mammalian. They came from a high-gravity world with extreme climate variations. They had developed nuclear weapons and nearly destroyed themselves. None of this concerned Scrix. The Hive had consumed species far more advanced. These humans would be no different. David Lee surveyed the tactical situation from the Armstrong's bridge, his expression calm despite the odds. A 3-to-1 disadvantage was significant, but not insurmountable. The key was making the Ravagers fight on human terms. "They're forming a wall between us and the planet," Amy reported. "Standard blockade formation. They're not even moving to intercept us. They think they've already won," David said. "Let's educate them." "Signal the fleet. Execute pattern Delta." The human ships suddenly scattered in all directions, abandoning any semblance of military formation. To the Ravagers, it looked like panic. Scrix ordered a pursuit, dividing forces to chase down the fleeing vessels. That was the first mistake. The Armstrong and 6 other ships didn't flee. They accelerated directly toward Nest 7, running straight at the Ravager line. The enemy adjusted, pulling ships back to reinforce the blockade. But by then, the fleeing human vessels had looped around, using the planet's gravity to slingshot themselves behind the Ravager formation. Suddenly, Scrix's wall was under attack from both sides. The human ships darted in and out, firing precisely targeted bursts at communication arrays and sensor clusters. They weren't trying to destroy ships, not yet. They were blinding the Hive. "They fight without honor," one of Scrix's sub-commanders transmitted. "They use deception. Scrix didn't care about honor." The Hive adjusted tactics, trying to envelope the human ships and bring superior numbers to bear. But every time Ravager vessels moved to surround a human ship, it would slip away, only to appear somewhere else. harassing a different part of the line. Private Lucas Grant experienced his first real combat as the Armstrong shuddered under plasma fire. The young Marine had trained for years, but training never prepared anyone for the reality of battle. The ship groaned around him, metal screaming as it absorbed hits. "Boarding pods incoming," someone shouted. Lucas and his squad rushed to the breach points, taking position behind portable barriers. The Ravager pods punched through the hull with grinding metal shrieks, and then the enemy was there, pouring into the corridor. Lucas had seen pictures of Ravagers, but nothing prepared him for the reality. They were massive, each one the size of a small vehicle covered in black chitinous armor. Their mandibles clicked and their multiple legs carried them forward with terrifying speed. His training took over. Lucas fired in controlled bursts, aiming for the joints where armor plates met. The other Marines did the same, creating a disciplined wall of fire that shredded through the Ravager charge. But the insects kept coming. They climbed over their own dead, showing no fear, no hesitation. For everyone that fell, 2 more pushed forward. "Grenades!" Sergeant Blake roared. Explosions tore through the corridor, sending Ravager pieces flying. The attack faltered, and the Marines pressed forward, reclaiming the breach point meter by bloody meter. Lucas found himself face to face with a Ravager, its mandibles inches from his helmet. He jammed his rifle against what he hoped was a sensory organ and fired. The creature collapsed, twitching. The boarding action lasted 8 minutes. When it was over, 37 Ravagers lay dead or dying. 3 Marines had been killed, 5 more wounded. Lucas sat against a bulkhead, his hands shaking, trying not to vomit in his helmet. Blake knelt beside him. "First time is always the hardest, kid. You did good. They didn't stop," Lucas said. "They just kept coming." "That's what makes them dangerous," Blake replied. "But it's also what makes them predictable. They can't adapt, can't think creatively. We can." Similar boarding actions occurred across the human fleet. The Ravagers learned that close-quarters combat was not to their advantage. Humans were smaller, yes, but faster and more adaptable. They used the environment, setting traps and ambushes. They coordinated without needing a hive mind, each Marine capable of independent thought and action. Scrix processed the casualty reports with growing concern. The mathematics were changing. Human ships were being damaged but not destroyed. Human casualties were significant but sustainable. The Ravagers, meanwhile, were losing ships at an unacceptable rate. The hive mind consulted its collective memory, searching for any species that fought like this. The humans employed tactics that seemed contradictory. They would sacrifice position to preserve ships, then sacrifice ships to achieve position. They feinted and retreated, then suddenly attacked with overwhelming force. Worst of all, they seemed to predict Ravager movements before the hive made them. It was impossible. The hive operated on pure logic, optimal solutions to tactical problems. How could the humans know what the optimal solution would be? What Scrix didn't understand was that humans had spent thousands of years fighting each other. They knew every trick, every strategy, every way to exploit an enemy's predictability. The Ravager hive mind, for all its computational power, was fundamentally predictable because it always chose the most logical option. Humans didn't. Sometimes they chose the second best option because they knew their enemy would expect the best. Sometimes they made choices that seemed actively harmful because they led to unexpected advantages later. Dr. Nina Okonkwo worked in her lab while the battle raged, analyzing the Ravager prisoners they had captured. She discovered something important. The hive-mind connection relied on organic radio signals transmitted through specialized organs in the Ravagers. Thorax. "We can jam them," she reported to David. "If we broadcast on the right frequencies, we can disrupt their coordination." "Do it," David ordered immediately. Nina activated the jamming system, flooding space with white noise on the Ravager communication bands. The effect was immediate. Ravager ships began making mistakes, moving out of formation, firing at vectors their targets had already abandoned. On Nest 7, Ambassador Rella watched the battle in stunned silence. The humans fought with a precision and creativity she had never imagined possible. They moved like a flock of birds, each individual independent yet part of a greater whole. But what struck her most was their willingness to accept casualties. 3 human ships had been destroyed. Hundreds of humans had died, yet the rest fought on without hesitation, without the paralysis that would have gripped an avian force. "They know they are going to die," her aide whispered. "Some of them. And they fight anyway." They fight because some of them will die, Rella corrected quietly. They accept loss as the price of victory. We never could. The battle reached a critical point as David ordered a concentrated assault on the Ravager command ship. Every human vessel converged on Scrix's flagship, ignoring all other targets. The Ravagers moved to defend, but their jamming disrupted coordination couldn't match human determination. The Armstrong led the charge, shields failing, armor breaching, but guns still firing. David felt the ship dying around him, but they were so close now. Just a little further. All batteries focus fire on their bridge structure, he commanded. The combined firepower of 44 remaining human ships poured into one target. The Ravager flagship's shields collapsed. Its armor cracked. Its command center exploded in a brilliant flash. Scrix's consciousness scattered across the hive network. For the first time in the entity's existence, it felt something approximating fear. The humans weren't just fighting. They were winning, and they were doing it by being willing to die. Fire rained from the sky over Nest 7's capital city. Ravager dropships descended through the atmosphere like falling meteors, their heat shields glowing orange against the twilight. The avians scattered before them, their beautiful song spires crumbling under plasma bombardment. Drone Overseer Chicks coordinated the ground assault with mechanical precision. The hive had decided that orbital bombardment was insufficient. They needed to occupy the planet, catalog its resources, and process the remaining population. Chicks commanded 3,000 Ravager warriors, more than enough to pacify a species that had never known war. Then the human pods hit the ground. Sergeant Owen Blake felt his teeth rattle as the drop pod slammed into Nest 7's surface at terminal velocity. The impact gel absorbed most of the shock, but his bones still ached as the pod doors blew open and his squad poured out into the ruined city. "Move, move, move," Owen shouted, leading his Marines toward cover as Ravager plasma bolts sizzled past them. "Teams 2 and 3 flank left. Team 4, find high ground." The Marines scattered with practiced efficiency. They had trained for urban combat in 100 different simulations, fought mock battles in Earth's ruined cities and Mars's tunnel complexes. This was just another battlefield, except the stakes were real and the enemy didn't stop when the exercise ended. Owen's team claimed a collapsed building, using the rubble as cover. From this vantage point, he could see the Ravagers advancing in perfect formation, a wall of chitinous armor and plasma weapons moving methodically through the streets. "They're treating this like pest control," his corporal said. "No tactics, just overwhelming force." "Then let's teach them why humans are the pests that won't die," Owen replied. "Plant the charges on my mark." The Marines moved through the rubble, setting demolition charges on key structural supports. The Ravagers continued their advance, confident in their numbers and superiority. They had evolved to fight for resources on their harsh homeworld, but that meant direct confrontation, dominance through strength. Humans had evolved differently. They learned to set traps, to plant ambushes, to use terrain and timing to defeat larger predators. A human alone was weak. Humans together, with tools and tactics, could bring down anything. Owen waited until the Ravager formation was perfectly positioned beneath 3 leaning towers. "Blow it," he ordered. The charges detonated simultaneously. The towers collapsed inward, bringing down tons of stone and metal onto the Ravager advance. Dozens were crushed instantly. Others were trapped, injured, separated from the main force. Now, Owen led the charge, his Marines emerging from cover to engage the scattered Ravagers in close combat. The aliens were bigger, stronger, armored by nature, but they were confused, cut off from the hive's coordinating signals by the rubble and the jamming fields Dr. Nina had deployed. Individual Ravagers hesitated, uncertain, making them vulnerable. Marine rifles cracked in disciplined bursts. Grenades arced through the air. One Ravager tried to charge Owen directly, but he sidestepped the clumsy attack and planted a breaching charge on its thorax. The explosion sent chitin shards flying. "They're not used to this," one of his Marines shouted. "They don't know how to fight when they can't coordinate." "Keep the pressure on," Owen commanded. "Don't give them time to regroup." Dr. Nina Okonkwo watched the ground battle from the Armstrong sensors. Her laboratory transformed into a tactical command center. She monitored the jamming field's effectiveness, adjusting frequencies whenever the Ravagers tried to adapt. "The hive is attempting to establish new communication protocols," she reported to David. "They're using ultra-low frequency signals now. Can you block those too? Already on it. Nina's fingers flew across her console, reprogramming the jammers. But Captain, we need to understand something. We're not just disrupting their communications. We're literally causing them psychological trauma. Individual Ravagers aren't meant to operate independently. We're inflicting a kind of sensory deprivation on them. David considered this for a moment. Is that a problem, Doctor? Ethically? Maybe. Tactically, it's our biggest advantage. On the ground, Ambassador Rella emerged from her shelter for the first time in days. The sounds of battle echoed through the city, but they were different now. Not the one-sided slaughter of before, but the sharp crack of human weapons and the confused screeches of Ravagers being outmaneuvered. A group of human Marines ran past her position, moving with purpose and coordination that seemed almost choreographed. They communicated with hand signals and brief commands, each understanding their role without needing constant instruction. How do they do it? Rella wondered aloud. How do they fight as one without being one? Pip, her cousin who had survived the initial attack, stood beside her. His wounded wing had been treated by human medics, set in a splint that would allow it to heal. They trust each other, he said quietly. Each human knows their companions will do their part. They do not need a hive mind because they have something else. What? Faith in themselves and each other. A Ravager burst through a nearby wall, its mandibles clicking in agitation. Rella froze, her pacifist nature leaving her helpless before the predator. But Pip spread his good wing and shrieked, a desperate attempt to protect his cousin. The Ravager advanced, and then a human appeared. Private Lucas Grant, his armor scorched and dented, put himself between the Ravager and the two avians. He was half the alien size, his weapon nearly empty, but he didn't hesitate. Get behind me, Lucas shouted to the avians. The Ravager charged. Lucas waited until the last second, then dropped and rolled, firing upward into the creature's softer underbelly. The Ravager crashed past him, dead before it hit the ground. Lucas stood, breathing hard, and turned to the avians. Are you hurt? Rella stared at him in wonder. This young human had just risked his life for strangers, for aliens he had never met from a species he barely knew. Why, she asked. Why would you do that? Lucas looked confused by the question. Because you needed help. Ma'am, we need to get you to a secure location. This area isn't safe. As Lucas escorted them through the ruined streets, Rella began to understand something profound. Humans weren't just warriors. They were protectors. The violence they wielded with such skill was always in service of something greater. The battle for Nest 7's capital continued for 6 more hours. The Ravagers had numbers, but the humans had experience fighting in complex urban environments. Every street became a killing ground. Every building a potential ambush point. Drone Overseer Chicks attempted to coordinate a response, but the jamming fields made it impossible. Individual Ravagers fell back on instinct, which meant charging directly at threats. Against another species, this might have worked. Against humans who had perfected the art of channeling enemy aggression into prepared kill zones, it was suicide. Sergeant Blake's team linked up with 2 other squads, forming a mobile strike force that hit Ravager concentrations from unexpected angles. They used the Avian's own city against the invaders, turning the Songspire's resonant chambers into acoustic weapons and using the thermal currents that lifted Avian buildings to deploy improvised air support. They're breaking, Blake reported to the Armstrong. The ground forces are losing cohesion. Confirmed from orbit, Amy replied. Ravager dropships are beginning to withdraw. But David saw something else in the tactical display. The Ravagers weren't retreating in defeat. They were consolidating, pulling back to a fortified position near Nest 7's largest city. They're regrouping for a major offensive, he said. Doctor, can you localize the jamming to give them a corridor to communicate? Nina frowned. Yes, but why would we want them coordinating? Because I want to talk to whoever is in charge, and they'll only talk if they think they can win. The jamming field adjusted, creating a narrow band where Ravager communications could function. Within minutes, a signal came through. Drone Overseer Chicks speaking for the Hive, humans. You have fought well, but you are few and we are many. Withdraw and we will allow you to leave in peace. David smiled grimly. Counteroffer. You withdraw and we won't hunt down every ship in your fleet and turn them into scrap. A long silence. Then, you cannot defeat us. We have reserves, reinforcements. More ships than you have ammunition. Maybe, David admitted. But here's what you need to understand about humans. We don't fight because we think we'll win. We fight because it's the right thing to do. And we'll keep fighting until either you're gone or we're all dead. Your move, the communication ended. On the ground, the Ravagers began to pull back, boarding their ships in organized retreat. They weren't broken, not yet, but they were uncertain. And for a hive mind that operated on absolute certainty, uncertainty was a kind of death. Rella watched the Ravager ships lift off, barely believing what she was seeing. They are leaving. No, Lucas said quietly. They're running. There's a difference, but even in victory, the cost was clear. Human casualties mounted with each passing hour. The streets of Nest 7 were littered with the bodies of both defenders and invaders. The avians mourned their dead with songs that made even hardened Marines weep. Nina found David staring at the casualty reports, his face drawn with exhaustion. We've lost 32% of our ground forces, she said softly. The fleet is down to 39 operational ships. I know. Was it worth it? David looked out at Nest 7, at the avians emerging from their shelters to embrace human soldiers with cautious gratitude. Ask me when this is over. Somewhere in the depths of the Ravager command ship, Hive Commander Scrix made a decision that would reshape the future of the galaxy. The entity that had once viewed humans as insignificant, pests now recognized them as the most dangerous species it had ever encountered. The problem was that recognizing danger and knowing how to respond to it were two different things. The hive mind had evolved to solve problems through overwhelming force and logical efficiency. But the humans had demonstrated that logic alone was insufficient against creativity and adaptability. Scrix consulted the collective consciousness, drawing on the experiences of millions of Ravager drones. The consensus was clear. The humans must be eliminated before they could threaten the hive's expansion further. But how? Lieutenant Amy Rhodes worked through the night, analyzing Ravager movement patterns and communication intercepts. She had a theory, but it seemed almost too simple to be true. Captain, I think I've found their command nexus, she reported to David. The Ravagers aren't retreating randomly. They're pulling back to protect one specific ship. David studied the tactical overlay. Scrix, most likely. If we can take out that ship, we might be able to collapse their entire command structure. Or they might have a backup commander and we waste our advantage. David rubbed his tired eyes. But we're running out of time. Our ammunition is at 40%. Reactor cores are showing stress fractures from combat maneuvers. If we don't end this soon, we won't have the strength to finish it. Dr. Nina entered the bridge carrying a data pad and a grim expression. I've been analyzing the captured Ravagers. They've been conducting biological warfare tests on the avian populations. The temperature in the bridge seemed to drop. Every human present felt their blood go cold. Explain, David said quietly. They're engineering a plague, species-specific, targeting avian respiratory systems. If they deploy it, every avian in this system will be dead within a week. Nina's hands shook as she showed them the data, and based on the samples I found, they're almost ready to use it. David's calm facade cracked just for a moment. Rage flashed across his face, cold and terrible. Then we end this now. Amy, I need a plan to take out that command ship. Sir, the Ravager fleet is concentrated around it. We'd have to fight through 50 vessels to get close enough. Then that's what we do. Sergeant Owen Blake gathered his Marines for what might be their final briefing. The men and women before him were exhausted, wounded, running on stimulants and determination. But when he told them about the plague, about what the Ravagers planned to do to the avians, every face hardened with resolve. We've got one shot at this, Owen said. The Armstrong and the strike fleet will punch through to the command ship. Our job is to board it and secure their biological weapons. That's a suicide mission, Sarge, one Marine said flatly. Yeah. Any volunteers? Every hand went up. The human fleet reorganized into a spear formation, with the Armstrong at the tip. Every ship that could still fight, every weapon that still had ammunition, every soldier still standing prepared for the final push. High Counselor Bryn watched from the Galactic Council's observation post, his scales pale with anxiety. The other council members had gathered to witness what they believed would be humanity's destruction. The humans had fought well, exceeded all expectations, but mathematics couldn't be denied. 50 Ravager ships against 39 damaged human vessels. They should withdraw, a grass-eater delegate said. They have done enough. They can escape with honor. Humans don't retreat when innocents are threatened, Bryn said quietly. I've studied their history. They would rather die than abandon those who cannot defend themselves. That's insane. No, that's humanity. The attack began with a feint. Half the human fleet broke away, appearing to flank the Ravager formation. Skrix took the bait, dispatching ships to intercept. The moment the Ravager line weakened, David committed everything. All ships maximum acceleration. Weapons free. Target the command ship and nothing else. The Armstrong's engine screamed as it leaped forward. Every reactor pushed beyond safe limits. Ravager plasma fire filled space and human ships began to die. The frigate Dallas took a direct hit to its reactor and exploded in a silent flash. The destroyer Moscow lost its engines and spun out of control, but the rest kept coming. A hammer of steel and human will driving toward one target. Private Lucas Grant crouched in a boarding pod, listening to the battle rage outside. The pod shook with each impact, and he could hear the hull groaning under stress. He thought about Ambassador Rella and Pip, about the avian children he had seen hiding in the shelters, their eyes wide with fear. 30 seconds to breach, someone shouted. Lucas checked his weapon one last time. He wasn't a hero. He was just a kid from Chicago who had joined the military to pay for college. But sometimes ordinary people had to do extraordinary things. The pod hit the Ravager command ship with a grinding crash. The doors blew open and Lucas charged forward with his squad into a nightmare of chitinous corridors and screeching aliens. The fighting was brutal and close. Humans and Ravagers killing each other in corridors too narrow for mercy. Lucas lost track of time, moving on instinct and training. He saw friends fall, saw Marines perform impossible acts of courage, saw the true cost of protecting others. Sergeant Blake led the push toward the ship's bioweapons storage. Ravager defenders threw themselves at the human advance with suicidal determination, but the Marines had come too far to be stopped now. There, Blake pointed to a sealed chamber, its door marked with biohazard symbols. Blow it! The explosive charge opened the chamber, revealing rows of containment pods holding the engineered plague. Nina, who had insisted on joining the boarding party, immediately began setting demolition charges on the pods. How long until they're destroyed? Blake asked. 2 minutes. But Owen, if we detonate these charges inside the ship, the explosion will breach the hull. Anyone still aboard will be vented into space. Blake nodded grimly. Then we'd better evacuate fast. All teams fall back to the boarding pods. Double time. On the Armstrong's bridge, Amy watched the tactical situation deteriorate. More human ships were dying with each passing second, but they had accomplished their mission. The boarding teams had secured the command ship. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Sergeant Blake, she reported. They've planted charges on the bioweapons. Detonation in 90 seconds. Order all boarding teams to evacuate immediately. Sir, the pods can't launch while we're under fire. The Ravagers are targeting them specifically. David made his decision instantly. All ships concentrate fire on the vessels targeting our boarding pods. Everything we have. The human fleet, now reduced to 32 operational ships, turned its full firepower on the Ravagers surrounding the command vessel. It was a desperate move, leaving them exposed to attack from other angles. Ships took catastrophic damage. The heavy cruiser Beijing broke apart under concentrated fire. The corvette Seoul disappeared in a flash of plasma, but they bought time. The boarding pods launched, carrying Marines away from the doomed command ship. Lucas felt his pod accelerate, looking back through the small viewport to see the ship he had just escaped. The demolition charges detonated. The Ravager command ship tore itself apart from the inside, secondary explosions rippling through its structure. Hive Commander Skrix's consciousness scattered, screaming digitally across the Hive network before dissolving into static. For the first time in their history, the Ravager horde experienced true chaos, without their command structure, without the guiding intelligence that coordinated their every move. Individual ships and soldiers fell back on base instincts. They ran. Some Ravager ships tried to fight, but without coordination they were picked off one by one. Others fled immediately, jumping to faster-than-light travel without regard for formation or tactics. The mighty armada that had terrorized the Outer Rim dissolved in panic. On Nest 7, Ambassador Rella watched the Ravager ships flee. She spread her wings wide and sang a cry of joy and relief that echoed across the city. Other avians joined her, their voices rising in a harmony that had been silenced by fear. In the Armstrong's medical bay, Dr. Nina worked frantically to save the wounded. Marines with horrific injuries, burns, missing limbs, all the terrible cost of war. Some she could save. Others she held hands with as they died, whispering that they had won, that the avians were safe. David stood on the bridge, reviewing the casualty reports. Of the 47 ships that had answered the distress call, only 29 remained operational. 3,217 humans had died. Thousands more were wounded, sir, Amy said quietly. We're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. High Counselor Bryn wants to speak with you. David straightened his uniform and accepted the call. Bryn's image appeared, the reptilian's expression unreadable. Captain Lee, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I extend our gratitude for your defense of Nest 7. We did what was necessary, David replied. Yes, you did. Bryn paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. The Council is uncertain how to proceed. You have proven yourselves as warriors beyond any doubt, but that is precisely what concerns many of our members. You're afraid of us. Yes, you must understand, Captain. We have built a civilization on peace. Seeing what your species is capable of in war is deeply unsettling. David felt the weight of every human death pressing on his shoulders. High Counselor, we didn't want this fight. We wanted to join your peaceful galaxy and learn from species older and wiser than us. But when no one else would help, when innocent people were being slaughtered, we did what humans have always done. We stood up to bullies. At tremendous cost to yourselves. Freedom always has a cost. Someone has to pay it. The conversation ended, leaving David alone with his thoughts and the ghosts of those who had paid the ultimate price. Victory felt hollow when purchased with so much blood, but on Nest 7, avian children played in the streets again. Reconstruction had begun. Life continued because humans had been willing to die for it. Sometimes that had to be enough. The emergency transmission cut through the peaceful silence of deep space like a scream in the night. On planet Oriel, Elder Prism watched helplessly as the sky filled with hostile ships. His crystalline body pulsed with distressed patterns of light, visible to every member of his species across the city of Luminacy. The Luminari had never known war. They were beings of pure philosophy, creatures who spent centuries contemplating the nature of existence, while their bodies glowed with bioluminescent beauty. Violence was something they had evolved beyond, or so they believed. The Ravagers cared nothing for philosophy. These biomechanical pirates swept down from the stars with one purpose: to strip Oriel of its resources and take whatever they wanted. Their ships were grotesque things, half-living vessels that pulsed with stolen technology. Within hours, 3 massive hive ships positioned themselves in orbit while smaller attack craft descended on the helpless cities below. Elder Prism made the only choice he could. His people had no weapons, no defenses, no concept of combat tactics. He activated the ancient emergency beacon that connected them to the Galactic Assembly. Surely the advanced civilizations of the Council would come to their aid. Surely someone would help. The response came swiftly, but it was not what he hoped. The Galactic Council acknowledged their distress. Help was being prepared. Estimated arrival time 47 standard cycles, nearly 2 months by human reckoning. The Luminari would be extinct long before then. Prism felt his light dim to almost nothing. They were going to die, and the galaxy would mourn them politely after the fact. 3 billion kilometers away, in a different part of space entirely, Admiral Rebecca Holt reviewed the same distress signal at Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station Odin. She was a compact woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. Earth was still relatively new to galactic politics, and humanity's reputation preceded them wherever they went. The other species whispered about the Deathworlders, the predators from a savage planet who had somehow achieved spaceflight. "Play it again," Holt ordered. The signal repeated. It was a simple plea, translated by their computers into English. "We are dying. Please help us. The Ravagers have come. We have no defenses, please." Her tactical officer, a young man named Peter Russo, shook his head. "Admiral, we're not authorized to intervene in non-human conflicts. The Council has strict protocols about this. The Council is 47 cycles away," Holt said flatly. "How long would it take us to reach them?" Russo ran the calculations. 11 days at maximum, faster than light speed. "But Admiral, humanity is still on probationary status with the Galactic Assembly. If we intervene without authorization, there could be serious political consequences." Holt studied the distress signal data. The Luminari were pacifists. True pacifists, not just peaceful by choice but by evolutionary design. They literally could not conceive of violence. And the Ravagers were known throughout the galaxy as brutal scavengers who showed no mercy. "Prep the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet," she said. "Full combat load. I want the carrier Retribution and all escort vessels ready to move in 3 hours." "Admiral, I have to protest this decision," Russo said carefully. "The political fallout is my problem, not yours," Holt interrupted. "Someone sent a distress call. Someone is dying. We can reach them in time to help. That's all I need to know. Now execute my orders, Lieutenant Commander." Russo saluted and moved to comply. Holt knew she was potentially throwing away her career, maybe even facing a court-martial. Humanity had been so eager to prove they belonged among the civilized species of the galaxy. But what was civilization worth if you ignored pleas for help because of paperwork? The Retribution was a beast of a ship, a kilometer-long carrier that served as the mobile base for Earth's deep space operations. Captain David Reeves commanded her, a tall man with steady hands and a reputation for getting his people home alive. When he received Holt's orders, he didn't hesitate. Within 2 hours, his crew was at battle stations and the fleet was accelerating toward the jump point. Dr. Amara Osei, the fleet's xenolinguist, studied everything they knew about the Luminari during the journey. She was a woman who loved languages and cultures, who had dreamed of peaceful first contact with alien species. This was not how she had imagined meeting a new civilization. "They're pure pacifists," she briefed the command staff. "Not just culturally, but biologically. Their brains lack the neural structures for aggression. They literally cannot comprehend violence as a solution to problems." "Then how have they survived this long?" Reeves asked. "The Galactic Council protects them. They're considered a treasure, a species that achieved enlightenment. They create the most beautiful art and philosophy in the known galaxy. Everyone respects them. Everyone except the Ravagers, apparently," Reeves said dryly. The fleet pushed their engines to the limit. 11 days in faster-than-light travel was 11 days too long, but it was the best they could do. Back on Oriole, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The Ravagers had landed ground forces, biological nightmares that moved through the crystal cities harvesting anything valuable. The Luminari could only flee and hide. Elder Prism watched his people die and wondered if their civilization's greatest achievement, their absolute rejection of violence, was also their fatal flaw. His species had spent 10,000 years perfecting peace. They had created paradise. But paradise, it turned out, needed guardians. On the 11th day, the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Oriole's star system. The tactical screens immediately lit up with contacts. 3 Ravager capital ships in orbit. Dozens of smaller vessels swarming around the planet like insects. Energy signatures indicated ongoing bombardment of the surface. "Get me a damage assessment," Reeves ordered, "and someone find out if there are any Luminari left alive down there." The answer to both questions came quickly. The planet's cities were heavily damaged but not destroyed. The Ravagers were taking their time, harvesting systematically. And yes, life signs indicated millions of Luminari still survived. Though their numbers were dropping steadily, Admiral Holt opened a channel across all frequencies, broadcasting in every language their computers could manage. "This is Admiral Rebecca Holt of the Earth vessel Retribution. Ravager forces, you are ordered to cease all hostile actions immediately and withdraw from this system." The response was a burst of incomprehensible noise that their computers struggled to translate. The Ravagers were not interested in negotiation. "Didn't think so," Holt muttered. She turned to her communications officer. "Get me a line to the Luminari leadership. Let them know the cavalry has arrived." On the surface of Oriole, Elder Prism received the transmission with a mixture of hope and terror. He knew of humanity. Everyone in the galaxy knew of humanity. They were the species that evolved on a death world, a planet so hostile that only the strongest, most aggressive creatures survived. They were predators who had climbed to the top of their food chain through violence and cunning. The Galactic Council watched them nervously, unsure if humanity would prove to be a blessing or a curse to galactic civilization. And now these predators had come to Oriole. Prism didn't know whether to feel saved or doomed. Perhaps both. "This is Elder Prism of the Luminari," he responded, his voice transmitted through light patterns that human technology translated to audio. "We received your transmission. Are you truly here to help us?" Admiral Holt's response was simple and direct. "Yes, but you need to trust us and stay out of our way. We're going to do things that might frighten you. Can you do that?" Prism looked at the ruins of his civilization, at his dying people. We have no choice. Please save whoever you can. That's the plan, Holt said. Retribution out. She turned to face her command crew. Every eye was on her, waiting for orders. Outside the viewports, Oriel hung in space like a wounded jewel. Above it, the Ravager fleet was beginning to notice the new arrivals. All ships, Holt said calmly. Weapons free. Show them why you don't mess with Earth. The Ravager hive ships hung in orbit like diseased moons, their organic hulls pulsing with stolen power systems. They had been feeding on Oriel for days, growing fat on the pacifist civilization below. When their sensors detected the human fleet emerging from faster-than-light travel, the Ravager collective consciousness barely registered concern. These new ships were small by their standards. Just another species to harvest. That assumption would cost them dearly. Elder Prism stood in what remained of Luminace's central command spire, watching the human ships approach on holographic displays. His people had gathered around him, thousands of luminari whose crystalline bodies flickered with anxious light patterns. They had all heard the stories about humanity, the galaxy's youngest spacefaring species, the Deathworlders who still practiced warfare, the predators who had somehow avoided destroying themselves long enough to reach the stars. What have we done? Whispered Warden Gleam, the closest thing the luminary had to a military liaison. His title was ceremonial, a remnant from ancient times before the luminary had evolved beyond conflict. He had never expected to actually deal with military matters. We called for help and received monsters. Monsters fighting monsters, Prism replied quietly. Perhaps that is what we need. The human fleet moved with purpose that startled the luminary observers. Their ships did not drift peacefully through space. They prowled. The Retribution took point, its escort vessels spreading out in a formation that the luminary computers identified as a combat pattern. Weapons systems came online, energy signatures spiking across the spectrum. Elder Prism, we're receiving another transmission from the human flagship, a communications specialist announced, his light pulsing yellow with stress. Put it through. A woman's face appeared on the display. Admiral Holt looked tired but determined. Elder, we're going to need some information from you. What are the Ravagers after? What are they harvesting? Prism's light dimmed with shame. Everything. Our cities are built from living crystal that grows in harmony with our consciousness. The Ravagers are mining it. They are also taking our people. We do not know why. Slaves or food, probably both, Holt said bluntly. Several luminari in the command center pulsed with shock at her directness.
How many of your people are still alive?
Approximately 7 million in Luminous alone. Perhaps 20 million across the planet. We had a population of 100 million before the attack. Holt's expression hardened. We're going to get as many of you out as we can. But I need you to start evacuating your people from the cities. Get them underground into whatever shelters you have. Things are about to get loud. We will comply, Prism said. Then he hesitated. Admiral, I must ask. Why are you helping us? Your species has no treaty with ours. The Galactic Council has not authorized this intervention. For the first time, Holt smiled slightly. Elder, one of my ancestors had a saying, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Someone asked for help. We came, it's that simple. But the political consequences are my problem, not yours. Now get your people to safety. We have work to do. Retribution out. The transmission ended. Prism immediately began coordinating the evacuation, though his mind struggled with the human concept. They had come across the galaxy, risking political disaster simply because someone needed help. It was noble and terrifying in equal measure. Captain Reeves studied the tactical situation from the Retribution's command center. His tactical officer, Peter Russo, had already identified the Ravager fleet composition and attack patterns. 3 capital ships, sir, designated Alpha, Beta, and Gamma. Alpha is the largest, approximately 3 kilometers in length. Dozens of smaller attack craft, mostly sublight. They're using hit-and-run tactics on the surface, grabbing what they can and retreating to the hive ships. Energy signatures? Moderate. Their shields are biological, regenerating but not particularly strong. Weapons are primarily plasma-based with some kinetic systems. Nothing we haven't seen before, Reeves nodded slowly. The Ravagers were predators of a different kind than humans. They relied on overwhelming weaker species, scavenging rather than fighting peer opponents. They probably had never encountered serious resistance. Launch all fighter wings, he ordered. I want combat air patrol established around the planet. Any Ravager ship that tries to reach the surface gets turned into debris. Coordinate with the escort vessels for firing solutions on those capital ships. Sir, shouldn't we try to negotiate first? Asked a junior officer. They've already answered that question, Reeves said grimly. They're still attacking the surface. Actions speak louder than words. On Oriel's surface, Dr. Amara Ose had taken a shuttle down to meet the Luminari in person. She believed that understanding between species required face-to-face contact, even in crisis situations. The shuttle landed in a plaza filled with frightened refugees, and Amara stepped out wearing a lightweight environmental suit. The Luminari were beautiful. Their crystalline bodies refracted light into rainbow patterns, and they communicated through shifting colors and luminescent pulses. Amara's translator struggled to keep up with the complexity of their language. Warden Gleam approached her cautiously. His people had never seen a human before, and Amara could read the fear in his light patterns even without translation. I am Dr. Amara Ose, she said slowly, trying to project calm. I'm here to help coordinate the evacuation. You are human, Gleam stated, his colors shifting to deep blue. Your species still practices warfare? Yes, Amara admitted. There was no point in denying it. We do, but that's not all we are. We also practice medicine, art, science, philosophy, just like you, but you can kill. Your species is designed for violence. Amara chose her words carefully. Every species has the capacity for violence. The question is what you choose to do with that capacity. We choose to use it to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is a paradox. Violence in service of peace. Welcome to the human condition, Amara said with a sad smile. We live in the gray areas between ideals and reality. Their conversation was interrupted by a massive explosion overhead. The Luminari scattered in panic, their bodies flashing white with terror. Amara looked up to see a Ravager attack craft break apart in the atmosphere, torn to pieces by human fighter interceptors. Burning debris rained down kilometers away. Gleam stared at the destruction. They died so quickly. The fighters will protect you, Amara assured him. Now please, we need to get these people underground. More will come. In orbit, the battle had begun in earnest. Wing Commander Patricia Hayes led her fighter squadron in a weaving pattern between the Ravager ships and the planet. Her pilots flew with practiced precision, coordinating their attacks like predators hunting in packs. Gold 3, break left. 2 bogeys on your 6, she called out. Copy, Gold Leader. Breaking. Human fighters danced through space, their weapon systems far more accurate than the Ravagers expected. Every time a Ravager craft tried to descend toward Oriel, it ran into a wall of interceptors. The Ravagers had numbers, but humans had tactics honed through centuries of warfare. On the Retribution, Admiral Holt watched the engagement unfold. The Ravagers were adapting quickly, pulling back their smaller ships and preparing their capital vessels for a coordinated strike. They're getting smart, Russo observed. Then we get smarter, Holt replied. She opened a channel to Captain Reeves. David, I need you to do something risky. Take the Retribution forward. Make yourself a target. Reeves understood immediately. You want to draw them in. Exactly. They see a big target, they can't resist. When they commit, our escort vessels hit them from the flanks. Classic hammer and anvil. And if they don't take the bait, then we go to plan B, but I think they will. Predators always go for what looks like easy prey. Reeves gave the order, and the massive carrier began moving forward, its escort vessels deliberately falling back. To the Ravagers, it looked like the human flagship was overextending, separating from its support. The Ravager collective consciousness saw the opportunity. The large human ship was advancing alone. Destroy it and the rest would flee. All 3 hive ships began moving into attack position. On Oriel, Elder Prism watched the human vessel advance toward the enemy fleet. What are they doing? That ship is alone. It will be destroyed. Dr. Ose, monitoring the same tactical feed, recognized the pattern. No, Elder, they're hunting. And the Ravagers just became the prey. The 3 Ravager capital ships accelerated toward the Retribution, weapons charging. Their plasma cannons could tear apart most vessels in the galaxy. They closed the distance rapidly, eager to end this interference. Then Admiral Holt sprang the trap. All escort vessels execute flanking maneuver. Now. The human destroyers and cruisers that had seemed to fall back suddenly accelerated from above and below the orbital plane. They had never retreated. They had repositioned. Now they caught the Ravager hive ships in a devastating crossfire. Missiles streaked through space, energy weapons carved into biological hull plating. The Ravagers found themselves trapped between the advancing Retribution and the flanking escorts. "This is for every person you killed down there," Holt said quietly, watching the battle unfold. The Luminari throughout their cities watched the orbital battle through their collective consciousness link. They saw human ships move with coordinated precision. They saw weapons unleashed with calculated fury. They saw the Ravagers, the monsters who had terrorized them for days, suddenly fighting desperately for survival. And they began to understand something profound. Violence was not the opposite of civilization. Sometimes violence was what protected civilization. The humans were not monsters. They were guardians with fangs. The Crystal Gardens had once been Luminace's greatest treasure, a sprawling park where living crystal formations grew in impossible shapes, each one singing with harmonic frequencies that the Luminary found deeply soothing. Now the gardens were a battlefield, and the singing crystals were silent, many shattered by Ravager mining equipment. Sergeant Ann Foster crouched behind a broken crystal formation. Her squad spread out in defensive positions around her. They were United Earth Marines, veterans of hostile world deployments, and every one of them knew they were a long way from home. Anne was a compact woman with sharp eyes and quick reflexes, the kind of person who stayed calm when everything went wrong. "Movement, 3 o'clock, called out Corporal James Martinez from his position. "Multiple contacts. Ravager ground forces." Anne brought up her tactical visor and saw them. The Ravagers on the ground were horrifying things. Biomechanical hybrids that moved on too many legs. They carried weapons that looked grown rather than built. Organic rifles that spat corrosive projectiles. Intelligence said they were semi-intelligent, operating on hive instinct directed by the larger collective consciousness aboard the ships. "Hold fire until they're in the kill zone," Anne ordered. "Let them think this position is undefended." The Ravagers were hunting for Luminari refugees, a group of about 50 crystalline beings huddled in what remained of a meditation temple behind the Marine positions. When the Ravagers had first landed, they had walked through the peaceful Luminari like wolves through sheep, meeting no resistance because the Luminari were incapable of giving any. That changed when humanity arrived. The Ravager squad, 12 strong, moved into the garden's central plaza. They were confident, arrogant even. They had faced no opposition on this world, just frightened prey creatures who fled or froze. "Now," Anne said calmly. Her Marines opened fire with coordinated precision. Rifle rounds punched through Ravager armor. Grenades arced through the air and detonated among the confused enemy. In less than 10 seconds, 8 Ravagers were down. The remaining 4 tried to return fire but found themselves caught in a carefully prepared crossfire. Anne moved from cover, her rifle tracking smoothly. She put 2 rounds into a Ravager's center mass, then shifted to the next target. Her squad advanced in a textbook formation, covering each other's movement. Within 30 seconds, all 12 Ravagers were neutralized. "Cease fire," Anne called. "Martinez, Jones, secure the perimeter. Chen, check our guests. Make sure they're okay." Private Lisa Chen moved to the temple where the Luminari refugees were sheltering. They were pulsing with rapid light patterns that her translator interpreted as extreme distress. One of them, a younger Luminari named Radiance, approached Chen cautiously. "You killed them," Radiance said, her light patterns showing confusion rather than gratitude. "You killed living beings." Chen lowered her rifle and tried to project calm. "Yes, we did. Because they were going to kill you. But killing is wrong. All life is sacred. That is the foundation of civilization, is it?" Chen asked gently. "Those Ravagers killed thousands of your people. They were about to kill 50 more. We stopped them. Was that wrong?" Radiance's lights flickered through a complex pattern of colors. Her entire worldview was being challenged. "I do not know anymore. Everything I believed seems less certain now." Before Chen could respond, Anne's voice cut across the squad channel. "We've got company." "Big company." Multiple Ravager squads converging on this position. They're adapting faster than expected. The Marines immediately shifted into defensive positions. Anne pulled up her tactical map and counted at least 40 Ravager contacts approaching from 3 directions. Her squad numbered 8. Not good odds, but Marines trained for this. "Command, this is Foster," she called on the long-range channel. We've got a situation at the Crystal Gardens. Request immediate support. Captain Reeves's voice came back from orbit. Support is inbound, Sergeant. Hold your position. Protect those civilians, understood. We're not going anywhere. Anne turned to the Luminary refugees. Everyone get to the lowest level of that temple and stay there. Do not come out until we tell you it's safe. The Luminary hesitated. Radiance spoke up. Should we not flee? You cannot possibly fight so many. Anne checked her rifle and smiled grimly. You'd be surprised what 8 angry humans can do. Now move. The Luminary retreated into the temple as the first Ravager squads entered the garden. This time they were cautious, having learned that this was not an undefended position. They advanced using cover, coordinating their movement. They were adapting to human tactics. They're learning, Martinez observed. So are we, Anne replied. Let's teach them another lesson. Flanking positions on my mark. The Marines split into 2 fire teams and repositioned. When the Ravagers pushed forward, they found themselves caught in another deadly crossfire. But this time the Ravagers were ready. They returned fire with discipline, forcing the Marines into cover. The battle devolved into a brutal exchange of gunfire among the crystal formations. The beautiful gardens became a war zone, filled with the crack of rifles and the hiss of Ravager plasma weapons. Anne moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, her squad working like a single organism. Radiance watched from the temple entrance, unable to look away. She saw humans fight with a combination of skill and fury that her species had never conceived possible. They were organized, disciplined, but also utterly ruthless when necessary. Every movement had purpose. Every shot was calculated. They were not mindless killers. They were professionals, and their profession was war. A Ravager broke through the perimeter and charged toward the temple. Radiance froze, unable to even conceive of defending herself. Anne intercepted the creature, putting herself between the alien and the Luminary. The Ravager was twice her size, but Anne didn't hesitate. She emptied her rifle into its torso at point-blank range until it collapsed. Stay down, Anne snapped at Radiance, then returned to the fight. The battle raged for 20 minutes that felt like hours. The Marines' ammunition was running low when support finally arrived. A human dropship screamed over the gardens, its guns chattering. Ravager positions exploded under the aerial assault. The surviving enemy creatures retreated, finally recognizing that this was not prey but a peer predator. Anne did a quick count. All 8 of her Marines were still standing, though Martinez had taken a glancing hit to his armor. 40+ Ravagers had attacked their position. Fewer than 10 had retreated. Secure the area, she ordered, exhaustion creeping into her voice. Medical check on Martinez. Everyone else standard defensive perimeter. Radiance emerged from the temple along with the other Luminary refugees. They approached the human positions cautiously, their lights pulsing with complex emotions that even their sophisticated language struggled to express. You were willing to die for us, Radiance said to Anne. Beings you had never met before today. Anne was reloading her rifle, checking her equipment with practiced hands. That's the job, but why? What do you gain from this? Anne looked at the young Luminary directly. Sleep at night. The knowledge that we did the right thing. That's enough. I do not understand your species, Radiance admitted. You are capable of such violence, yet you use it to protect strangers. You are predators who guard the prey. It is a paradox. Yeah, well, humanity is full of those, Anne said. She gestured to the destroyed Ravagers. Those things are predators too. But there's a difference. They kill because that's all they know. We kill because sometimes that's the only way to stop the killing. You see the difference? Radiance's lights pulsed thoughtfully. I am beginning to. My people have believed for 10,000 years that we evolved beyond violence. We thought we had achieved true civilization. But now I wonder if we simply had the luxury of never being tested. Peace is easier when someone else handles the ugly work. Anne agreed. Your species is lucky. You had the Galactic Council protecting you. You never had to get your hands dirty. Most species aren't that lucky. What was your world like? Radiance asked. Before you reached the stars? Anne thought about Earth. Oceans that could swallow ships. Predators in the forests. Diseases that killed millions. Wars that scarred continents. Brutal, unforgiving. A planet that tried to kill us every single day. We survived because we learned to fight back. We learned to work together, to protect our own, to never give up no matter how bad things got. It made us hard, But it also made us human. In orbit above them, the space battle continued. Admiral Holt's trap had crippled one Ravager hive ship and damaged another. But the fighting was far from over. The Ravagers were calling for reinforcements, and long-range sensors detected more ships entering the system. Captain Reeves studied the updated tactical display and made a decision. Prepare boarding teams. We're going to hit that damaged hive ship and see if we can find any captured Luminari. Sir, boarding a Ravager vessel is extremely dangerous, Russo protested. Their ships are designed to be hostile environments for other species. Which is why we're sending Marines, not diplomats, Reeves replied. Contact Sergeant Foster's unit. When they're done securing the Crystal Gardens, I want them prepped for a ship-to-ship assault. Anne received the orders just as her squad was establishing a secure perimeter around the refugee temple. She looked at her Marines, all of them tired, running on adrenaline in training. Gear up, she told them. We're going hunting in space next. And I want everyone to remember, we don't leave people behind, human or otherwise. Her squad gave a chorus of affirmatives. They were exhausted, but they were also United Earth Marines. This was what they trained for. This was who they were. Radiance watched them prepare with growing understanding. These humans were warriors, yes. Killers, absolutely. But they were also something her species had never needed to be. Guardians. They had teeth and claws not just for hunting, but for protecting. They were wolves, but wolves who guarded the flock rather than feeding on it. And for the first time in her life, Radiance began to question whether her species' absolute pacifism was enlightenment or simply naive privilege. Space around Oriel had become a graveyard. Debris from destroyed Ravager ships tumbled through orbital paths while human fighters weaved between the wreckage like sharks circling wounded prey. The damaged Ravager hive ship designated Beta was venting atmosphere, its biological hull breached in a dozen places. But it was still dangerous, still armed, and still holding prisoners. Wing Commander Patricia Hayes pulled her fighter into a tight formation with her squadron. She had been flying combat missions for 12 years, and she had never seen anything quite like a Ravager hive ship up close. It was obscene, a 3-kilometer tumor of stolen technology and organic matter fused into something that should not exist. Gold Squadron, maintain combat air patrol around the hive ship, she ordered. Nothing gets in or out without my authorization. Silver Squadron, you're on overwatch for the boarding operation. Copy. Gold Leader, came the responses. The boarding craft launched from the Retribution, armored shuttles carrying Marine assault teams. Anne Foster watched Oriel shrink below them through the shuttle's viewport. Beside her, the rest of her squad checked their equipment with practiced efficiency. They had traded their standard rifles for boarding weapons. Shotguns, submachine guns, weapons designed for close-quarters combat in confined spaces. First time boarding a hostile ship? Asked Private Lisa Chen, trying to calm her nerves with conversation. Third, Anne replied. First was a pirate vessel off Mars. Second was a derelict research station that had been overrun by corrupted AI. Both of those were human ships. This is going to be different. How different? The ship itself might try to kill us. Ravager vessels are partially alive. They can seal corridors, change their internal layout, even release toxins. We're not just fighting the crew. We're fighting the ship. The shuttle shuddered as it approached the damaged section of the hive ship. Through the viewport, they could see the wound in the vessel's hull, a massive breach that exposed twisted corridors and pulsing organic walls. 30 seconds, called the pilot. Anne stood and addressed her squad. Listen up. Our mission is simple. Locate any Luminary prisoners and extract them. We're not here to hold territory or destroy the ship. Get in, find the prisoners, get out. Questions? Corporal Martinez raised his hand. What if we encounter heavy resistance? Then we demonstrate why you don't kidnap people when humans are around. Standard rules of engagement. Anyone shooting at you or the prisoners, you put them down. Hard. The shuttle locked onto the hull breach and extended its boarding tube. The airlock cycled and the Marines moved in. Anne went first, her weapon up and ready. The interior of the Ravager ship was like walking into a nightmare. The walls pulsed with faint light, organic tissue interwoven with mechanical systems. The air was thick and humid with a smell like rotting vegetation mixed with machine oil. Move with purpose, Anne whispered. Double-check your corners. Remember, the ship can hear us. They advanced into the corridors and immediately the environment began to change. Passages that had been open started to constrict. Walls shifted and moved like living muscle. The Ravager hive ship had detected intruders and was responding. "This is insane," Chen muttered as a doorway ahead of them began to seal itself. "Breaching charge," Anne ordered. "Fast." Martinez slapped an explosive charge onto the closing door and the squad fell back. The charge detonated, blowing the door open. They moved through quickly before the ship could adapt again. Their scanners detected life signs deeper in the ship. Luminary biosignatures faint but present. Anne led her squad through the twisting corridors, fighting not just the environment but also Ravager defenders. The creatures emerged from side passages and hidden alcoves, their weapons spitting corrosive rounds. The Marines responded with brutal efficiency. In the tight corridors, their close-quarters weapons were devastating. Shotgun blasts tore through Ravager armor. Grenades turned intersections into kill zones. Anne moved through the chaos like a machine, her training overriding any fear or hesitation. They found the first group of prisoners in what could only be described as a harvesting chamber. 30 Luminari were held in organic pods, their crystalline bodies dimmed almost to nothing. The sight made Chen's stomach turn. The Ravagers had been draining them, harvesting their unique biology for unknown purposes. "Get them out," Anne ordered. "Cut those pods open, carefully." While her squad worked to free the prisoners, Anne held the corridor against Ravager counterattacks. She could hear the ship around them, groaning and shifting like a living thing in pain. The hive ship was dying from the damage it had sustained in the battle, but it had enough life left to be dangerous. One of the freed Luminari, a being whose light had nearly gone out entirely, reached toward Chen with a trembling crystalline hand. "Why do you help us?" "We are nothing to you." Chen helped support the weakened alien. "Your people in trouble. That's all that matters." More Marines were pushing deeper into the ship, finding more prisoners. The Retribution's tactical team was coordinating the operation, feeding location data to the boarding teams. They estimated over 200 Luminari were being held across the damaged hive ship. On the Retribution's bridge, Captain Reeves monitored the operation while simultaneously managing the larger space battle. The Ravagers had received reinforcements, 2 more hive ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. They were adapting their tactics, becoming more cautious, more coordinated. "Admiral, we're going to have to choose," Reeves said to Holt. "Either we pull the boarding teams back and engage the new arrivals, or we commit to the extraction and risk getting caught in a 2-front engagement." Holt studied the tactical display. Mathematics said they should retreat, secure what they had, fight another day. But mathematics did not account for the 200 Luminari still trapped aboard that ship. "We hold position," she decided. "Commit the reserve fighters to intercept the new arrivals. Buy our people time to complete the extraction. That's going to stretch us thin." "Admiral, then we had better be very good at our jobs." "Captain." Wing Commander Hayes received the new orders and felt her stomach drop. Her fighters were already running low on ammunition and fuel. Now they were being ordered to engage fresh enemy ships that outnumbered them. She looked at her squadron, at the pilots she had trained with, fought beside, trusted with her life. "All wings form up on me," she ordered. "We're going to show these new arrivals what happens when you crash Earth's party uninvited." Her fighters accelerated toward the approaching Ravager ships. The new hive ships launched their own attack craft in space filled with combat. Hayes flew with aggressive precision, her weapons finding targets with practiced accuracy. Around her, her squadron fought like demons, their ships dancing through the enemy formations. It was not a battle humanity could win through superior numbers or firepower. They were outnumbered, outgunned, running on fumes. But they had something the Ravagers lacked: centuries of experience fighting impossible odds. Every human pilot knew their history, knew the stories of battles won against overwhelming force through skill and determination. On the damaged hive ship, Anne's squad had linked up with 2 other Marine teams. They had freed over 100 Luminari and were fighting their way back to the extraction point. The ship's immune response had fully activated now, and they were facing heavy resistance. A Marine named Jackson went down, a Ravager plasma round burning through his armor. Anne dragged him to cover while Chen and Martinez laid down suppressing fire. "How bad?" Anne asked, checking Jackson's wound. "Bad enough," he gasped. "Leave me. Get the civilians out." "We don't leave people behind," Anne said flatly. She pulled an emergency medical pack from her belt. "Martinez, I need you to carry Jackson. Chen, you're on point. Everyone else, tight formation. We move together or not at all." A young Luminari named First Light, One of the rescued prisoners watched in amazement. The humans were wounded, exhausted, outnumbered, but they refused to abandon anyone. It went against all logic, all self-preservation instinct. It was noble and foolish and brave. "Your species is insane," First Light said to Chen. Chen grinned despite the situation. "Yeah, we get that a lot." "Keep moving." They fought their way corridor by corridor, room by room. Every meter was contested. The ship itself seemed to fight against them. Walls closing, floors becoming unstable, toxic gases being released. But the Marines adapted faster than the ship could respond, using explosives to open new paths, environmental suits to protect against the toxins. Finally, they reached the extraction point. The boarding shuttles were waiting, their pilots performing impossible maneuvers to hold position against the ship's dying convulsions. Anne counted her people as they loaded the rescued Luminari. "Everyone accounted for?" she asked. "All Marines present," Martinez confirmed. "Plus 143 Luminari civilians." "Then let's go home." The shuttles pulled away from the dying hive ship just as a massive explosion tore through its core. The vessel broke apart in a silent fireball, its biological components burning in the vacuum. Anne watched it die and felt no satisfaction, only relief that they had gotten everyone out. In space beyond, Hayes' fighter squadron was running on empty. 3 of her pilots were gone, their fighters destroyed in the desperate holding action, but they had bought the time needed. The boarding teams were clear. "All wings, break contact and return to carrier," Hayes ordered. "We've done our job." Admiral Holt watched the tactical display as her forces withdrew to defensive positions around Oriel. They had bloodied the Ravagers badly, destroyed 1 hive ship, rescued over 100 prisoners, but the cost was mounting. Her fleet was battered, running low on ammunition and fuel, and there were still Ravager ships in the system. "Status report," she ordered. Russo compiled the data. "We've lost 3 fighters, 2 damaged beyond field repair. Marine casualties, 4 dead, 12 wounded. Ship damage across the fleet is moderate but manageable. The Retribution took several hits but remains combat effective." Holt nodded slowly. Earth Command would be demanding answers soon. The Galactic Council would be outraged at the unauthorized intervention. Political consequences would be severe. None of that mattered right now. "What about the Luminari?" she asked. "Civilian casualties on the planet are estimated at 70 million. But we've stabilized the situation. No new attacks in the last 3 hours. The Ravagers are regrouping." On Oriel's surface, Elder Prism stood among his people in the refugee shelters. The humans had stopped the slaughter, but at what cost? He watched the human Marines moving among the Luminari, offering medical aid, providing security, treating them with respect and compassion. These predators from a death world had crossed the galaxy to protect strangers. They had bled for people they had never met. They were everything the Galactic Council had warned about, violent and dangerous and unpredictable. But they were also something his species had never truly understood. Warriors who fought not for conquest but for protection. Radiance approached him, her light patterns showing profound confusion. "Elder, I have been speaking with the humans, learning about their history, their culture. Did you know their world tried to kill them? Predators, diseases, natural disasters. They evolved fighting for survival every single day." "I have heard this, yes. They could have become monsters. They should have destroyed themselves. But instead they learned to protect each other. They created codes of honor, rules of warfare, concepts of justice. They are predators, yes, but they are predators who chose to be more." Prism's lights pulsed with understanding, and we are prey who never had to make that choice. We evolved in paradise and called it enlightenment. Perhaps we were simply fortunate. What do we do now, Elder? When this is over, what becomes of us? Prism looked at the human Marines, at the warriors who had saved his species. "We learn, young one. We learn that peace is not the absence of the capacity for violence. Peace is the choice to not use that capacity unless necessary. The humans understand this. Perhaps it is time we did as well." The medical bay aboard the Retribution was working beyond capacity. Human medics moved between beds treating both their own wounded and the rescued Luminari. Dr. Amara Osei worked alongside them, her xenobiology expertise crucial for understanding how to treat crystalline physiology. She found it darkly ironic that humanity's first real act of cooperation with the Luminari was patching up the survivors of a massacre. A Luminary physician named Clarity worked beside her, his light patterns dim with exhaustion. His people had medical knowledge, but it was all theoretical. They had not treated violence-related injuries in thousands of years. Now he was learning battlefield medicine from a species the galaxy considered barbaric. "This one's light is fading," Clarity said, his patterns flickering with distress. "I do not know how to help." Amara examined the patient, a Luminari elder whose crystalline structure had been damaged by Ravager extraction equipment. "We need to stabilize his energy matrix. Can you modulate light frequencies to match his natural resonance?" Clarity stared at her. "How did you know that would work? Your species is carbon-based. You should not understand our biology. We spent the whole trip here studying everything we could about your people," Amara explained as they worked. "When we commit to helping someone, we do it properly." Together, human and luminary physicians worked through the night, saving lives that would have been lost. It was a partnership born from necessity, but Clarity found himself respecting these strange predators. They were meticulous, dedicated, and genuinely cared about their patients regardless of species. On the planet's surface, reconstruction efforts were beginning. Human engineers worked alongside luminary builders, clearing debris and repairing critical infrastructure. Radiance had volunteered to serve as a liaison, helping translate not just language but also concepts between the two species. She watched a human engineering team set up a portable power generator to restore electricity to a damaged district. Their equipment was robust, over-engineered, designed with redundant systems. It was so different from Luminari technology, which was elegant and efficient but fragile. "Why do you build everything with backups?" Radiance asked the team's leader, a gruff woman named Sandra Kowalski. "Because things break," Kowalski replied, checking power connections. "Earth taught us that if something can fail, it will fail, usually at the worst possible time. So we plan for failure and build accordingly." "That seems pessimistic. It's realistic. Your people built for an ideal world. We built for the world we actually live in. Neither approach is wrong, but only one works when things go bad." Radiance watched them finish the installation and power up the generator. Lights came on across the district, and she heard the collective sigh of relief from her people. The humans made it look easy, but she was beginning to understand the expertise behind their casual competence. "Can you teach me?" she asked suddenly. "How to build things that survive damage?" Kowalski looked surprised. "You want to learn human engineering? I want to learn how to protect my people. You build things that last, that endure. We need to learn that." The human engineer smiled. "All right, kid. First lesson, always assume the worst and build for it. Second lesson, redundancy is your friend. Third lesson, if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing." In orbit, Admiral Holt faced a different kind of challenge. A Galactic Council vessel had arrived, a sleek diplomatic ship that made even the Retribution look crude by comparison. The Council representative, an avian species named Ambassador Quill, demanded immediate communication. Holt sat in her command chair, Captain Reeves standing beside her, as the ambassador's hologram appeared before them. Quill was an impressive being, covered in iridescent feathers that shifted colors with his mood. Right now those colors indicated displeasure. "Admiral Holt, I must formally protest the unauthorized presence of human military forces in this system," Quill began, his translator rendering his chirps and whistles into clipped English. "Humanity does not have authority to intervene in Galactic Council affairs." The luminary sent a distress call, Holt replied calmly. We responded. "That's not intervention, Ambassador. That's basic decency. The Council had already dispatched appropriate assistance. Your presence was not required and is not welcome. Your assistance was 47 days away. The luminary would have been extinct by then." "How is that appropriate?" Quill's feathers ruffled with irritation. "That is not the point. There are protocols, procedures, proper channels for these matters. Humanity is on probationary status with the Galactic Assembly. This violation could result in your species being barred from galactic affairs entirely." Reeves stepped forward. "Ambassador, with all due respect, there are 70 million Luminari alive right now who would be dead if we had followed your protocols. Are you seriously suggesting we should have let them die to preserve bureaucratic procedure? I am suggesting that there are reasons for these protocols. The galaxy has rules, Captain. Civilization requires order." "Civilization requires protecting the innocent," Holt said quietly. "Everything else is just paperwork." The conversation was interrupted by a transmission from Oriel's surface. Elder Prism's image appeared, his crystalline form pulsing with determined light patterns. "Ambassador Quill, I must speak," Prism said. "The Galactic Council did not save my people. Humanity did. They came when we called. They fought when we could not. They bled for us, and now you arrive, days late, to criticize them for doing what the Council should have done." Quill's feathers shifted to more subdued colors. "Elder Prism, you must understand the political complexities. I understand that my people are alive because humans ignored your politics." Prism interrupted. "I understand that we have been naive, believing our enlightenment made us superior. We evolved beyond violence, yes, but we also evolved beyond the ability to defend ourselves. We became dependent on others to protect us. That is not enlightenment. That is helplessness." "What are you saying, Elder?" Prism's lights pulsed with resolve. "I am formally requesting that humanity be recognized as the protectorate species for Oriel. We trust them. They have earned that trust with their actions." The statement sent shockwaves through the diplomatic channels. A Galactic Council species requesting protection from humanity. The Deathworlders, the species everyone feared. It was unprecedented. Ambassador Quill struggled to respond. "This is highly irregular. The Council must deliberate on such matters. There are procedures." "Then deliberate," Prism said firmly. "But the humans stay until you do. We will not be left defenseless again." The transmission ended. Holt allowed herself a small smile. The Luminari were learning quickly. But the political maneuvering became irrelevant when the tactical alarm sounded. Lieutenant Commander Russo's voice was urgent. "Admiral, we have a problem. Long-range sensors are detecting a massive Ravager fleet assembling at the system's edge. 15 capital ships, hundreds of support craft. They're preparing for a major assault." Holt felt her stomach sink. The Ravagers had been probing, testing. Now they were committing their full force. Her fleet was damaged, running low on supplies, exhausted from days of continuous combat. They could not win a direct engagement against those numbers. "Get me Earth Command," she ordered. Priority 1. The connection took several minutes to establish across the vast distances. When Admiral James Harrison's face appeared on screen, he looked grim. "Rebecca, I've been following your situation. The Council is pushing for your immediate withdrawal. Sir, the Ravagers are preparing a final assault. If we leave now, the Luminari die. All of them. I know. I've reviewed your tactical reports. You can't win this, Rebecca. Not with what you have. Then send reinforcements. The second fleet could be here in 8 days. You'd be overrun in hours." Harrison paused, then continued more gently. "You did good work there, Admiral. You saved millions of lives. But there's a point where courage becomes suicide. Bring your people home." Holt looked around her bridge. Her crew was watching her, waiting for orders. They were Earth's finest, veterans who had followed her into impossible situations before. But this was different. This was a no-win scenario. "Sir, request permission to stay and continue operations." Harrison's expression hardened. "That's an order, Admiral. Withdraw immediately. That's final." "Understood, sir. Permission to speak freely?" "Granted." "With all due respect, Admiral, that's a terrible order and I'm going to ignore it." Harrison actually smiled slightly. "I thought you might say that. For the record, I'm ordering you to withdraw. When you refuse and face a court-martial, I'll testify that you acted in the finest traditions of Earth's military service." "Holt, give them hell." The connection ended. Holt turned to her crew. "You all heard that. I just committed career suicide and probably actual suicide. Anyone who wants to follow orders and withdraw, I'll arrange transport on the Council ship. No judgment, no consequences. You signed up to serve Earth, not follow a crazy admiral on a suicide mission." Nobody moved. Not a single person. Captain Reeves spoke for all of them. "We're with you, Admiral. All the way." On the planet's surface, word spread quickly about the incoming Ravager fleet. Panic rippled through the Luminari population. They had just started to hope, just started to believe they might survive. Now that hope was being crushed. But something unexpected happened. The younger Luminari, those who had witnessed human courage firsthand, began to organize. Radiance stood before a crowd of her peers in the ruins of the Crystal Gardens. "The humans are going to fight," she announced, her lights pulsing with determination. "They are going to stand between us and the Ravagers even though they are outnumbered. They are going to die defending us. Then we should flee," someone called out. "Hide in the deep caverns until it is over." "And let them die alone?" Radiance's lights flashed with anger. an emotion Luminari rarely experienced. For 10,000 years, we have prided ourselves on being enlightened. We claimed moral superiority because we rejected violence. But what have we actually done? We created beauty while others bled to protect us. We philosophized about peace while other species fought to preserve it. We are not enlightened. We are cowards. The crowd pulsed with shocked light patterns. Elder Prism, who had been listening, approached slowly. Radiance speaks truth, he said quietly. Painful truth. We have been prey pretending to be above the struggle between predator and prey. But there is a third option. We can be neither prey nor predator. We can be guardians of our own fate. But we cannot fight, Clarity protested. Our biology, our neural structure, it prevents us from initiating violence, now Prism interrupted. But the humans have taught me something. Defense is not the same as aggression. Protection is not the same as conquest. Perhaps our evolution did not remove our ability to defend. Perhaps we simply never needed to learn how. Sergeant Ann Foster had been listening from nearby. She approached the gathered Luminari carefully. Elder, are you saying what I think you're saying? Teach us, Prism said. We cannot become warriors in a few hours, but perhaps we can learn to defend our homes, to operate systems, to support those who fight for us. Teach us how to protect ourselves. Anne looked at Radiance, at the young Luminari's determined light patterns. She thought about everything she had seen, everything they had been through. Then she smiled. All right, let's start with basics. Who here wants to learn how to operate a defensive turret? Hundreds of crystalline hands rose toward the sky. The Ravager Armada emerged from faster-than-light travel like a swarm of locusts descending on a field. 15 massive hive ships, each one larger than the Retribution, accompanied by hundreds of smaller attack craft. Their biomechanical hulls pulsed with malevolent energy as they positioned themselves around Oriole. This was not a raid anymore. This was extermination. Admiral Holt stood on the bridge of the Retribution and watched the enemy fleet assemble. Her tactical officers were frantically calculating firing solutions, but the mathematics were brutal. The human fleet was outnumbered 5-1 in capital ships, 10-1 in smaller craft. They were low on ammunition, low on fuel, and exhausted from days of continuous combat. Final ammunition count? She asked quietly. Lieutenant Commander Russo delivered the grim news. Missile stocks at 23%. Energy weapons can sustain maybe 2 hours of continuous fire before we need to shut down and recharge. Point defense systems are at 40% capacity. And our people? Tired but ready, Holt nodded. She had asked her crew to follow her into the jaws of death, and not one had hesitated. Now she would lead them into their final battle. All ships, battle stations. Formation Delta 7. We're going to make them pay for every meter. On Oriole's surface, Ann Foster watched the sky fill with enemy ships. She had trained Luminari volunteers for exactly 4 hours. It was not nearly enough time to turn pacifists into soldiers, but it was what they had. Radiance stood beside her, operating a defensive turret with shaking crystalline hands. I am frightened, Radiance admitted, her light patterns flickering with barely controlled panic. Good, Anne said. Fear keeps you alert. It's what you do with that fear that matters. You can let it freeze you, or you can use it to protect what you love. Around them, other Luminari manned defensive positions throughout Luminas. They did not know proper tactics or combat doctrine, but they knew their homes were behind them, and that would have to be enough. The Ravager fleet began their assault with overwhelming force. Attack craft descended toward the planet in waves while the capital ships engaged the human fleet in orbit. Space erupted with weapons fire, missiles crossing the void like shooting stars, energy beams cutting through the darkness. Wing Commander Patricia Hayes led her depleted fighter squadron into the maelstrom. She had 34 fighters left from an original complement of 60. Facing them were hundreds of Ravager craft. Stay tight, stay smart, she transmitted to her pilots. We can't match their numbers, so we outfly them. Make every shot count. Her fighters dove into the enemy formation like hawks among crows. The Ravagers had numbers, but humans had desperation and skill honed through countless battles. Hayes destroyed 3 enemy craft in rapid succession, her weapons finding weak points with practiced precision. But the sheer weight of numbers began to tell. Human fighters fell one by one. Hayes watched her pilots die and kept fighting because that was all she could do. The Retribution shuddered under repeated impacts. Ravager plasma weapons hammered at her shields while bioorganic missiles sought weak points in her armor. Captain Reeves coordinated the defense, routing power to damaged sections, directing damage control teams to critical areas. Hull breach on Deck 7, came the report. Sealing now. Fire control reports missile tubes 3 and 4 are offline. Engineering says we're down to 60% reactor output. The reports kept coming, each one worse than the last. The Retribution was dying by inches, but she kept fighting. Her weapons carved into Ravager ships, destroying 2 of the smaller hive vessels. But it was not enough. On the planet, the first wave of Ravager ground forces landed on the outskirts of Luminas. Anne's defensive line held for the first assault. Human Marines and their Luminari volunteers working together. Radiance fired her turret with trembling determination. The weapons recoiled, jarring her crystalline body. She hit more than she missed, and that was all anyone could ask. But the second wave broke through. Ravager ground troops poured into the city streets. Anne's squad fell back to the refugee center, fighting a running battle through the crystal buildings. Corporal Martinez went down, a plasma round burning through his armor. Private Chen dragged him to cover while Anne and the others provided covering fire. "We can't hold much longer," Chen shouted over the sounds of battle. "We hold as long as we need to," Anne replied, reloading her weapon. Behind them, thousands of Luminari civilians huddled in the refugee center, counting on them for protection. Failure was not an option. In orbit, Ambassador Quill watched the battle from his diplomatic vessel, horrified by the carnage. The Galactic Council ship was equipped with powerful shields but no weapons. They could observe but not intervene. He had spent his career believing in the superiority of civilized discourse over barbaric violence. Now he watched as that philosophy crumbled before reality. "Why do they keep fighting?" his aide asked, watching human ships continue to engage despite terrible damage. "They cannot win. Why do they not retreat?" Quill watched a human destroyer explode, her crew dying to buy seconds of time for the planet below. He watched fighters throw themselves at impossible odds. He watched the Retribution, burning and broken, position herself between the Ravager fleet and Oriel. "Because they are insane," he whispered, "and perhaps that is what the galaxy needs. Not sanity, not reason, but beings crazy enough to stand when any rational creature would flee." Admiral Holt knew the end was near. The Retribution had taken catastrophic damage. Her escort vessels were gone, destroyed, or disabled. The fighter wings were down to single digits. The Ravagers were preparing their final push, gathering for one overwhelming strike that would crush the last human resistance and consume Oriel. She opened a channel to all remaining human forces. "This is Admiral Holt, I won't lie to you. We're done. We gave everything we had and it wasn't enough. But I want every one of you to know something. We came here for the right reasons. We fought for something that mattered. And because of us, millions of people got to live a little longer. That's not failure. That's what being human means." Captain Reeves stood beside her, his uniform torn and bloodstained. "Admiral, we could attempt to evacuate, save who we can, and leave the Luminari to die. That's not who we are, David. We stay, we fight. We go down swinging." The Ravager fleet began their final approach. This was it, the last stand. Then something impossible happened. The space around Oriel lit up with new faster-than-light signatures. Massive ones. A voice crackled over the communication channels, speaking in heavily accented English. "Human vessel Retribution. This is the Galactic Defense Coalition. We are here to assist." Holt stared at her tactical display in shock. Ships were appearing all around the system. Not Council diplomatic vessels, but warships. Real military craft from a dozen different species. The Coalition had come. Ambassador Quill was equally stunned. This cannot be. The Council did not authorize military intervention. His aide checked the incoming data. "Ambassador, these ships are not Council vessels. They are independent response from individual species. The reports of humanity's stand have spread across the galaxy. They came on their own." The Coalition fleet smashed into the Ravager armada like a hammer. Fresh ships with full weapons and shields tore through the exhausted Ravager forces. The battle's momentum shifted in seconds. On Oriel's surface, Anne watched Ravager forces suddenly pull back, called to defend their ships in orbit. The pressure on her position eased. Chen laughed with exhausted relief. "We're not dead." "Why aren't we dead?" "Because apparently the galaxy has a conscience after all," Anne replied, hardly believing it herself. The battle raged for another 3 hours. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Ravager fleet was shattered, their ships destroyed or fleeing into faster-than-light travel. The crisis was over. In the aftermath, Admiral Holt met with the Coalition commanders. They were a diverse group representing species she had never encountered before. A reptilian commander named Scalebright spoke for them. "We came because we heard what you did. A species barely in space, risking everything for strangers. That is true civilization. That is what the galaxy should be." "We just did what was right," Holt said tiredly. "Exactly, and it shamed us. The Council talks about civilization while you live it. We will not make that mistake again." The human casualties were devastating. 300 dead, twice that wounded. The retribution would need months of repairs. But Oriel was saved. 20 million Luminari survived because humanity had said no to darkness. Elder Prism stood in the ruins of Luminous and watched human and Coalition ships orbit his world. Dr. Amara Osi stood beside him, both of them exhausted beyond measure. "Your species paid a terrible price for us," Prism said, his lights dim with sorrow. "That's what Guardians do," Amara replied. "We protect. Sometimes it costs us, but it's worth it. We have been naive. We thought evolution beyond violence meant we were superior, but we were simply fortunate. We never faced the choice between our principles and our survival. You face that choice every day and somehow remain decent beings." "We're not perfect," Amara said. "We struggle. We fail sometimes. But we try. That's all anyone can do." In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Council was forced to acknowledge what had happened. Humanity's intervention, though unauthorized, had saved an entire species. The coalition that had responded independently became a new political force, one that valued action over bureaucracy. The Luminari made their choice official. They requested humanity as their protector species, and this time the Council could not refuse. But more importantly, they began learning from their new allies, not how to make war but how to protect peace. Radiance became humanity's primary liaison, working with human engineers and soldiers to develop Oriel's defenses. The Luminari would never be warriors like humans, but they could learn to defend themselves with human guidance. Anne Foster remained on Oriel for 6 months, training Luminari volunteers in defensive tactics. On her last day before returning to Earth, Radiance approached her in the rebuilt Crystal Gardens. "Thank you," the young Luminari said, "for teaching us that strength and compassion can coexist." "You already knew that," Anne replied. "You just needed someone to show you how." The memorial was constructed in the center of Luminas, a fusion of Luminari crystal and human metal. It honored both species fallen, their names etched in light and steel. The inscription was visible from space, a message to the entire galaxy. When darkness called, the predators answered. And we learned that fangs can guard as well as tear. Admiral Holt stood before the memorial during its dedication, her career somehow intact after intense political maneuvering. Elder Prism stood beside her, his light pattern steady and strong. "What you did here changed the galaxy," Prism said. "Species are rethinking what civilization means. The Council's authority is being questioned. You started a revolution." "We just helped some people who needed it," Holt replied. "Exactly. And that simple act revealed a profound truth. True civilization is not the absence of the capacity for violence. It is the choice to use that capacity only in defense of the innocent. Your species understands this instinctively. We had to learn it through pain." Holt looked at the memorial, at the names of her people who had died so far from home. "Was it worth it?" she asked quietly. 20 million Luminari are alive to ask that question because of you," Prism replied. "Yes, Admiral. It was worth it." Months later, back on Earth, Anne Foster sat in a quiet bar with what remained of her squad. They had medals now, commendations, recognition. But they did not talk about the awards. They talked about the people they saved, the Luminari they protected, the choice they made to stand when any sane person would have run. "Do you think they'll be okay?" Chen asked. "The Luminari?" "Yeah," Anne said. "They're tougher than they look. And they're learning. Give them a few generations and they'll be able to protect themselves." "And us?" Martinez asked. "What are we?" Anne smiled. "We're human. We're the crazy ones who run toward the danger instead of away from it. We're the species that said the galaxy needed guardians, and then became those guardians whether anyone asked us to or not." "That's insane," Chen said. "Yeah," Anne agreed. "But someone has to be." Across the galaxy, in council chambers and military academies, diplomats and soldiers studied what happened at Oriel. Some saw it as a cautionary tale about unauthorized intervention. Others saw it as proof that the old ways needed to change. But everyone agreed on one thing. Humanity had announced themselves to the galaxy not as conquerors or explorers or traders. They announced themselves as protectors, as the species that would answer the call when darkness came. The Ravagers, what remained of them, fled to the darkest corners of known space. They had learned a terrible lesson. The galaxy had predators now. Predators who hunted predators. Predators who protected the prey. And somewhere in the depths of space, other species in trouble heard the story. They heard about the humans who came when everyone else was too late. They heard about the species that fought impossible odds to save strangers. And when new distress calls went out across the stars, they were addressed not to the Galactic Council, but to Earth. Because the galaxy had learned something profound. Sometimes when you cry for help, you don't need enlightened philosophers or cautious diplomats. Sometimes you need monsters on your side. Sometimes you need predators who chose to guard instead of hunt. Sometimes you need humanity. And humanity in all its violent, compassionate, insane glory would always answer the call.